Okay, I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many of you joining us for this important event hosted by Princetonians for Free Speech and featuring two undergraduates at this critical time for Princeton and for higher education in general. My name is Leslie Spencer, and I graduated from Princeton in 1979. I'm the vice chair and an executive committee member of PFS. Before we get started, I just have to go over a few housekeeping items. We will be taking questions. Please submit your questions using the button in the bottom of the screen that says Q&A. Questions put into the regular chat will not be considered. You are welcome and encouraged to submit questions in the Q&A at any time during the talk, and they will be answered at the end. We have limited time, so there's a chance we will not be able to get to every question, but we will do our very best, and I apologize in advance if we can't get to yours. The webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email after it's finished with a link to the recording. Please do share it. Our speakers today are Danielle Shapiro from the class of 25 and Max Meyer from the class of 27. Danielle Shapiro is a senior at Princeton studying political theory and Jewish history. She is a board member of Princetonians for Free Speech and has been a leading voice in defense of free expression, academic freedom, and viewpoint diversity on campus. She has written extensively in the Wall Street Journal, the Free Press, and the Princeton Tory about the crisis of open discourse at elite universities, and she has written and spoken widely about Princeton's increasingly fraught climate for free inquiry. On campus, she previously served as president of the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, which is the university's only club dedicated to preserving Princeton's truth-seeking mission. As co-founder and co-president of Bartzenu Princeton, a Zionist club she helped to launch in the wake of October 7, she has worked tirelessly to shift the Zionist position on campus from one of passivity to one of pride and strength. Whether it be challenging Princeton's administration in the pages of the Wall Street Journal, organizing the university's October 7 vigil in 2024, combating anti-Israel sentiment within her own Hillel, or bringing a wide array of cultural and intellectual events about Princeton, about Israel to campus, Danielle has consistently sought bold and creative ways to promote Zionism and to combat campus anti-Semitism. Thank you for joining us, Danielle. Maximilian Meyer is a sophomore at Princeton, where he studies politics and serves as the president of Princeton Tigers for Israel. In his role, Max has been at the forefront of the fight against the anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism plaguing our college campuses. In the last number of months, Max has published a column and been profiled in the New York Post. He has appeared on primetime news programs on television and been extensively quoted in local and national media outlets. At Princeton, Max continues to directly and publicly challenge faculty, administrators, and invited guests, including world leaders who publish anti-Israel and anti-Western propaganda upon Ivy League students. A native New Yorker, Max also serves in local government as a member of Manhattan Community Board 8, covering a large swatch of the East Side, and currently works part-time as an intern for a member of Congress from Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us, Max. Okay, on April 7th, a major disruption broke out during an event in McCosh featuring former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. I'll leave the details to today's guest to share, but I will add that the April 7th event disruption is the worst we've seen on on Princeton's campus. We applaud Danielle and Max for issuing a stern letter to President Eisgruber the day following the incident. With that, let's go to our conversation. Let's start with Danielle. Could you just start by telling us what happened, the chronology of events, what happened at that event?
Absolutely. Thank you to Leslie and everyone else from the PFS team, Princetonians for Free Speech team, for having me. And I think I say that for Max as well. We're very grateful to be here and speak about that event because it's really important. So This event was hosted by the Center for Jewish Life, the Chabad here on campus, the School of Public and International Affairs. There were multiple co-sponsors of this event, and the intention was to bring the former and very possibly future Prime Minister of the State of Israel, Naftali Bennett, to speak on campus, specifically in a fireside Q&A in conversation with Rabbi Gil Steinloff, the executive director of our Hillel here. And when this event was announced, immediately we heard rumors that there might be problems at this event from individuals who did not want this event to take place because they had a personal political issue with Naftali Bennett. And about a week before the event began, we heard more concrete plans that anti-Israel activists, both students and outside individuals, were planning to formally protest the event. Now, this event, importantly, was only available for students and faculty and staff to attend. It was not an open event, so it was really supposed to be only for students and affiliates of Princeton University. So on the day of the event, I think the important way to break it up probably would be inside the actual venue and what took place outside of the event. So the event began at 7:30 p.m. and Max and I were both sitting inside of this auditorium, very eager to hear Naftali Bennett. And about 10 minutes, 15 minutes into the event, about 20 Princeton students started getting up. They were almost all masked, and they started getting up and screaming at Naftali Bennett, disrupting the event, obviously. And they were doing a protest march out. So it took about a minute or two to get those individuals out. They were screaming profanity at the former prime minister. They were accusing him of genocide, accusing him of slaughtering, gassing children, starving the people of Gaza, et cetera, committing all sorts of terrible crimes. And these individuals were specifically seeking to interrupt the event. This is something they've since bragged about on social media. So the intention was very clear. They wanted to disrupt the event through their walkout. They also held up signs. As I mentioned, they really tried to mask up so that they were not disclosing their identity. And that was a very important part of that protest. Princeton free speech facilitators, who the university hires, they're members of the undergraduate student office. They are meant to be free speech facilitators and ensure that we have a safe environment for free inquiry on campus. They essentially shuttled these people out, but really on their own pace. So the protesters were really able to protest and disrupt the event in the way they wanted and stage their walkout on their own terms. Not 5-10 minutes later, another individual got up and started interrupting Mr. Bennett, started screaming at Bennett of all sorts of profanity, accusing him of genocide. Importantly, this individual was not a university affiliate. This was a random social media anti-Israel activist who had traveled to the event and trespassed inside the venue. As I mentioned, this was a closed event. He did not register. He was not allowed to attend. So this was a trespasser. And this disruption actually took over 2 minutes to deal with because he refused to leave. And the free speech facilitators refused to really do much about it. They said, "Sir, you're interrupting the program," as if he didn't already know that. "Sir, you're not able to do that. Sir, you need to leave." They handed him a card saying, "Sir, you're disrupting the program," basically to prolong the disruption because this fellow obviously just ignored that. And it was only when he was really threatened with being arrested and removed that way that he made his way out. But again, this was disruption again within the first 25 minutes of the event, disrupted twice, and really taking away, me and Max and I really came for this intellectual experience. It's a big honor. So it's unfortunate that it kept getting disrupted. But then again, not 10 minutes later, the fire alarm was pulled in the venue, which of course, aside from the free speech issues with that, there's obviously legal concerns about pulling a fire alarm if there is no fire. And it was very clear immediately there was no fire. The building was checked, absolutely no fire. An individual had pulled this alarm to really disrupt the event and prevent it from taking place. And of course, it took almost 10 minutes for fire marshals to turn off the alarm because once the alarm goes on, they have to contact Princeton Fire Department. So it was a whole thing. And the fire alarm going off basically effectively ended this event. And Naftali Bennett said, "Look, we got through most of it. It's unfortunate. We ended with a moment of Jewish song and excitement toward Passover, so that was nice. But it was really unfortunate that it was really disrupted 3 times. And the other thing that I think I would note from inside the venue is that what was happening outside the venue really made it difficult to hear what was happening inside the venue. And that outside the venue was a group of over 200 protesters who had marched with drums, microphones, and megaphones, standing, screaming right outside the venue. If anyone knows Princeton, they know that McCosh is not a young building. So as you can imagine, the sound acoustics, it travels right into the room. And it was actually very difficult to hear Mr. Bennett, even before and aside from the official disruptions of the event because of their megaphone, their microphone, their drums. They were very disruptive, even in the minutes that we were supposed to be able to hear aside from the disruption. So that entire event was a debacle in terms of university's ability to really maintain an open forum. It was quite disgraceful. And of course, I think I would be remiss without mentioning that outside protesters, those individuals were yelling the worst anti-Semitic slurs I've ever experienced on this campus, the likes of you're all expletive inbred to Jewish students, to go back to Europe, to calling for intifada. That's one we've heard many times before, but there were also new lows, as I just mentioned, and that was something very concerning. And I think I also just have to ram home the point that almost all these individuals were masked up, and we had no idea who among them was students, who were individuals from outside the university, who were individuals who did not belong on our campus, who we just have no idea who they are. It's a matter of security, obviously. So I hope that covers what was happening both in the formal event and outside. There's a lot of moving pieces, so I hope that that's clear.
Excellent, Danielle. That is a very thorough recounting. So Max, could you explain the demands that you made that were outlined in the letter that you crafted after the event?
Absolutely. And thank you again to Princetonians for Free Speech for hosting this event. Very important to defend free speech at this critical juncture. And so Danielle and I wrote a letter the next day, the next morning after the event. And in it, we had 5 principal demands. The first was that the university publicly apologized to the former prime minister for the university's failure to provide an open forum for his remarks. It was an embarrassing spectacle for the university not to be able to welcome the former prime minister of our greatest ally in the Middle East, not to mention the fact that it's just a blatant violation of the free speech and expression to which all students and all faculty and all invited guests must have the right at our university. The second demand that we laid out was that the university pursue punitive action against every individual and every entity responsible for the disruption of the event. And that was a very important point because the university has too often taken a very light hand when it comes to imposing discipline on those who repeatedly violate the rules of the university. And that goes for one of our third demand as well, which was that the university terminate its recognition of the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter here at Princeton. This is an organization that has repeatedly violated the time, place, and manner restrictions of this university. And it's important to note, time, place, and manner restrictions exists for the exclusive purpose, for the intent, with the intent of protecting the free speech of those whose voices might not be the loudest. And it was the voices who follow the rules and who are not shouting, who are not pulling fire alarms, who were actually restricted by the so-called free speech of those who violated the time, place, and manner restrictions of the university. And so discipline is a very important measure that the university take. Our fourth demand was that the university enact a campus ban on face coverings used for the purpose of concealing one's identity. Now, we're not talking about those who have legitimate health problems. We're talking about reimposing laws that have existed all around the country and did exist for 100 years, not 100 years, for decades all around the country, in states and cities, actually enacted as a result of the KKK as intimidation tactics, wearing masks, wearing face coverings in order to perpetrate its vile thoughts. And so this is not unprecedented, but it's a basic public safety measure and it's a basic protection of free speech because you have the right to say whatever you want in the open forum so long as it doesn't promote violence against a particular group. But you don't have the right to do that without the ability to be identified. And if you're violating university policies, you're violating the law and doing so in a way that cannot be, that renders you unidentifiable, you have no business being here. You have no business, using your voice in that arena. And our final demand was that President Eisgruber unequivocally condemn the displays of anti-Semitism that were expressed at the protest outside that event. Danielle just touched upon it, but telling Jewish students to go back to Europe, calling them inbred, saying you're all expletive inbred, calling for an intifada. These chants, these calls are some of the worst examples of anti-Semitism, and the stuff that, if allowed to continue to fester, doesn't takes us back to the 1930s, takes us back to the pre-Holocaust German time. And so we called to President Eisgruber. President Eisgruber has decided that he wants to be the principal voice opposing the Trump administration's actions on a federal level, to target anti-Semitism, to target all sorts of discrimination on college campuses. And he had just written in The Atlantic, in a national column a few days prior, that this is a quote, that every citizen and office holder who cares about the strength of our country must also care about free speech, self-governing thought, and the untrammeled quest for knowledge. What happened on his campus under his watch just 2 or 3 days after he wrote that column was a violation of free speech. It was an indictment of the university's ability to allow for self-governing thought, and was demonstrative of the university's utter lack of commitment to the untrammeled quest for knowledge and engaging with open discourse. So those were our demands, and we wanted to lay them out very clearly for the university.
Great. Thanks, Max. If anyone in the audience wants to see this letter or a separate letter that Princetonians for Free Speech sent to the administration, you can find them on the Princetonians for Free Speech website. Next question. Max, we'll start with you, but certainly Danielle, pitch in. How would you describe the atmosphere for Jewish students on campus before and after the April 7th event?
Well, what I'll say is something I say to a lot of people who ask about what it's like to be Jewish on Princeton's campus. And I say, look, it's not Columbia.
Right.
But that's also the wrong answer. It's the right answer and the wrong answer, because factually it's true. But Columbia is also not the bar by which we should be judging what is an acceptable level of anti-Semitism on a college campus. So that's a very crucial distinction to make. And, just a few days before this event, I believe it was this event was on a Monday, the Bennett event. On Friday, there had been a conference hosted by Professor Max Weiss, one of the most notoriously anti-Semitic professors on Princeton's campus, who led the encampment last year, which was a complete violation of the university's rules, unenforced. And this event had some of the most vile anti-Semitic, anti-American people hosted as experts, panelists. One person who was on a panel was Sahar Aziz from Rutgers. This Sahar Aziz, who she runs a center at Rutgers, and on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, her center, security studies, something along those lines, brought in a convicted terror supporter from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad who had served a sentence to speak on the anniversary of 9/11. These panels hosted someone from Stanford, Joel Benin, who said that Israelis show, quote, open bloodthirstiness. They had Maura Finkelstein, who was fired from a tenured position at Muhlenberg College for having incited violence against Zionists, who said that Hillel, which is the campus Jewish center where Orthodox and religious Jewish students eat their meals, said that Hillel is a tool of repression that makes everyone less safe. So all of that leading up to the overt displays of anti-Semitism where you tell Jewish students to go back to Europe and call them inbred, those are key points to understand that, even if it's not Columbia here, there is a huge problem and it needs to be tackled. And there's not enough being done to tackle it.
Okay, Danielle, do you have any?
Yeah, I'll just jump in because as it was mentioned at the beginning of the tour, I'm not the tour, the program. Max is a sophomore here, and I think I could just speak a little bit to the longer period, because I'm a senior here. So I was here for really a couple years plus before October 7th happened. And I would just say that Jewish life before and after October 7th on Princeton's campus, before anything else, is truly magical being in the Jewish community here. The opportunities we have, the community we have a brand new Chabad house that is truly extraordinary. And we have students hanging out there at all hours of the day. Our kosher dining hall here, Princeton really does care about making sure that Jewish students can eat kosher food, which is something I personally care a lot about, in a way that makes them part of the Princeton community. So I do think we have to really realize the ways in which Jewish life is good here on campus. And it really is special to be a Jewish student here on campus. But I think the but is important there, that since October 7th, there have been concerns, and Max has just outlined those concerns. And I'm the first to say that those concerns are serious. And this is something I've said as well, that just because we're not Columbia doesn't mean that that should be the bar. And it's truly embarrassing when I think Princeton says it in that way. But I would just say that, like, Jewish life is really is wonderful here. But I think we do have to recognize the problems from the outside that really do threaten the viability of that Jewish life long term. Because at the end of the day, the kosher food is important, and having prayer groups is crucial. But at the end of the day, if the environment is not going to make Jewish students feel happy here, and if the environment is going to challenge Jewish students' identity in ways that they just don't want to do it, they'll go somewhere else, that really will threaten Princeton's Jewish community. So it is a wonderful community, but it is being gravely threatened by these forces that we've outlined.
Great, very good. Thanks so much to both of you. So obviously the administration is now in the hot seat. Danielle, what has Princeton done in response so far to the April 7th event?
Yeah, great question. And Max has just run through what we demanded of the university. So if I were to just also run through kind of what the various responses have been. So the first thing I would say is President Eisgruber has not yet responded to, I mean, Max, I don't think he responded to you. He definitely has not responded to me. Yeah, he has not responded to either of us personally. Not that talk is the most important thing. We'd much prefer action, but I think that's just an important thing to say. And I'll also just note that he has condemned the anti-Semitism, which we do appreciate. And he has personally apologized to the former prime minister, which are both obviously demands we made and things that we're very grateful for. But also, his talk is a little bit cheap insofar as we're going to talk about the event we had last night, having the Israeli ambassador to America on campus. That event, I actually invited President Eisgruber to give the introductory remarks to show campus and to show the Jewish community, pro-Israel community, that our voices matter on campus too, and that we have a right to freedom of speech, freedom of inquiry. I actually invited him personally. I sent an email. I don't even know if Max knows this. I invited him to give the introductory remarks to remind campus of the importance of free speech and to give that announcement to every attendee, irrespective of whether that attendee agreed with the ambassador's remarks. So it's important to note that he has declined an important action that could have demonstrated his commitment to freedom of speech on this campus. But just to speak a little bit more, so as I mentioned, he has apologized to Mr. Bennett. He has condemned the anti-Semitism. The university has not done anything about masks. And again, Max and I emphasize that the masks thing, it is crucial, and it is just a level of basic security for Jewish students. And I think we just have to ram home this point once more. People are not wearing these KN95s because they're scared of being immunocompromised. Oftentimes they're wearing other face coverings that aren't even medical. So this has nothing to do with medical at all. And I think it's just, we need to get that from the beginning. The second thing is punitive action. They have not punished anyone for this event yet, although they are leading an investigation on it. So stay tuned is what I would say. We're cautious about how far the university is willing to go, because thus far they've been hesitant in their willingness to punish individuals, but we can't comment formally on that until obviously that investigation is concluded, because perhaps this will be a different story.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, I will say the university has made no statement regarding the SJP club. That is something that Max and I insist on as well. And this is, you have to remember, this is not us asking for the termination of Students for Justice in Palestine because they are Students for Justice in Palestine. This has nothing to do with that. It is content neutral. If any club was violating the freedom of speech of another club, or if any club was violating time, place, and manner restrictions in any capacity, I think our call would be equally loud. This is a club that it doesn't matter what they would be advocating. At the end of the day, they are violating university rules left and right, and it is simply unacceptable. The last thing I would note is a development that actually happened just 2 days ago, and that's that Princeton switched its disruption policies ever so slightly, in a bit of an interesting way. I think I mentioned earlier that during the event, when these disruptors got up and made their whole disruption protest, there were multiple levels of them being informed that they're violating university policies. These free speech facilitators would come up to these individuals, "Sir, you're violating the policy. Wait a half a minute. Sir, here's a card saying that you're violating the policy. Wait another minute," and then perhaps remove the individual, apprehend and remove the individual. So the university has switched it to almost a one strike and then you're out system, so that you would get one warning from these free speech facilitators that you are violating the policy, at which point afterwards, if you do not comply, you would be removed from the facility. Now, this is obviously a step in the right direction, but to be quite frank, it's not nearly enough. If anyone's disrupting an event this isn't someone's phone accidentally going off in a movie theater and them needing to be warned, even perhaps if they were warned before. This is premeditated. And I think we have to just emphasize that point. All those 20, 25 students who got up, the vast majority of them were masked from the beginning of the event, I will also note. These students got up at the same time, started yelling at the same time with signs they had produced. They were all matching. This was a premeditated, coordinated effort. This was not some accidental phone going off. That is to say, these individuals don't need an announcement, a warning saying, "You are violating the policy, ma'am. You are violating the policy, sir." These individuals are doing that intentionally. And as a result, any delay in removing these individuals immediately from the room is only furthering their cause and preventing me, preventing Max, preventing all the 200 individuals who were at that event from actually having that intellectual experience as a Princeton student. So I think we say that's a nice start, Princeton. I think I speak for both Max and myself when I say that. It's a nice start, but we have to do way more than that.
Okay. Very good. So this is a good moment for the next question to Danielle. We'll start. You held another event last night. Can you explain the event to the audience and why you decided to hold it and what occurred at it?
Yeah, so last night we hosted the Israeli ambassador to the US, Dr. Yechiel Leider. And first and foremost, we hosted him because I think a group that has the opportunity to host the ambassador from a country to the US would take that opportunity up. It's an incredible opportunity. We're a Zionist club having that ambassador. I can't think of a better opportunity, truthfully. So as soon as we heard that perhaps he was interested in speaking at a place like Princeton, specifically at Princeton, I jumped at the opportunity. So that's first and foremost, just because in any circumstance, that is an incredible honor to give that podium to him at Princeton University. So that's the main reason. And he was there to deliver remarks on the demonization of Israel and the rise of anti-Semitism. And we had also heard word that there would be a protest for this event, but I had actually coordinated a lot. I've met multiple times in the past week with his security team, as well as university security and free speech facilitators, where I emphasized the point about the disruption that I just made in the previous question, that any warning system just serves to further delay individuals from hearing the event. This is something I was very concerned about from the beginning. And I was unsure about the security situation, but I was assured that this would not be a problem. I will say that I think there were over 50 public safety officers at that event last night. For about 70 students checked in, we have word of. And there were 50 protesters outside. It was a notably smaller group, and they were told that they were not allowed to use amplified sound. So no drums, no microphones, no megaphones. Not, to my knowledge, because of our event, because you couldn't hear it if they were doing that, but because there was a separate event happening in the chapel. So our event, they're able to drown out, but the event happening in the chapel, that they were told to not use amplified sound for that reason. So I suppose we're grateful in that instance, but in terms of policy, that's still something that's deeply problematic. But ultimately, we were very grateful because I think there were no disruptions to this event actively, which we're very, very happy about. People did ask critical questions, but they were in good faith. So ultimately, that's totally okay for us. And I think in a lot of senses, like these students were deterred just because of the sheer number of public safety officers who were there. I think people were a little bit on edge in light of Mr. Bennett's event. So I would say in reflection of that event, although perhaps the university did a good job at deterring these individuals from interrupting, the jury is really still out about how Princeton would respond to disruptors, because ultimately it was not tested that night. So we're very grateful for how the event went, but in terms of policy analysis, we still have to hold our breath for, God forbid, another disruption happens, how Princeton would respond to that.
Great. Thanks, Danielle. Just as a reminder to audience, anybody who wants to ask a question, submit it to the Q&A. So Danielle, you had a conversation with the administration in advance of yesterday's event. And so just give us a little more about what that was about and what was the outcome.
Yeah, so I really covered a lot of it. I met with Dean Fisher from Otis, that undergraduate staff body. So they oversee a lot of undergraduate programming on campus. And I think we spent 35 minutes where I explained to him that premeditated disruptions are not the same thing as a phone going off in a movie theater. He likened the two. That's why I came up with that example today. That is straight from Dean Fisher. He saw no difference there. And I think that's really important to note. But ultimately, it was my concern over the fact that the ambassador would not be given a proper forum. We're very grateful. But again, ultimately on a policy level, it was not tested. I really would just emphasize that.
Right. So this is really for both of you, but maybe start with Danielle or Max. Where do you think this leaves things now? What do you suspect will happen at, for instance, tomorrow? There's an event featuring the New York Times columnist Bret Stephens. How do you think, can you make any sort of predictions about how that will go?
I think I'll let Max speak about the general predictions, because I think he probably has thoughts. In terms of Bret Stephens, we do not have any formal word, just because this is a Barrett's new event, so I'm involved in a little bit of the planning. We don't have any formal word of protesters for this. At the end of the day, Naftali Bennett and the Israeli ambassador simply are more controversial figures for these protesters, but we don't have any word. In terms of the broader campus environment, I think Princeton has taken a step in the right direction, but I still have deep concerns about the policies of freedom of speech on campus and their implementation more significantly, because we do have that University of Chicago free speech principles, but those principles are also complemented by a lot of silly rules in terms of amplified sound, time, place, and manner restrictions that don't actually go anywhere. And more importantly than anything else, probably, it's the bureaucratic loops on our campus. And I think Max can speak to this quite well as well, where I was having my meeting with Dean Fisher. He can't solve anything because he has to ask someone. That individual has to ask someone. Basically, there's this bureaucratic lump on this campus where no one's taking responsibility for the inability of a former prime minister to speak freely.
Max?
Yeah, I think that not to necessarily weigh in more on the prediction of what's going to happen, I think that I feel similarly to Danielle, but I also think that that last point that Danielle brought up about the bureaucratic web that it takes to get anything done on this campus is extraordinarily important to underscore, because look, like my group, with the help of an alumna who I actually believe is on this webinar, we were looking to bring Douglas Murray, who's a very prominent voice in support of Israel, but also in support of Western values. And he's been, in the last couple of weeks, he's been on Joe Rogan, he's been on Bill Maher. I mean, he is making the rounds, and he's a very prominent voice in the media. And the funds had been secured for Tigers for Israel in coordination with a donor and some other campus groups to make this event happen. A date had been secured where, had we sent a formal offer letter, a binding offer letter, we could have actually made that event happen all in the span of under 2 weeks, a week and a half. But when it comes to the university, you have to you have to get an approval for the space, and then you have to get an approval to send the contract, and then you have to meet with one person from the office of the dean of undergraduate students, and then you have to meet with another person, and then you have to meet with them all together, and then you have to meet with them together with the other co-sponsoring groups. And by the time any of that happens, by the time you could even send the offer, the date is booked, or you only have 2 days to plan the actual event logistically, and it doesn't work. So the problems are really on an administrative level, and that goes for the public safety stuff as well. I mean, these are not problems that are on an individual level. I talk to and I have great relationships with so many of the public safety officers, the law enforcement on campus, and they're wonderful people and they want to keep us safe and they want to protect our free speech, but they have to operate within the realm of what they've been told to do. And that all comes from above their level, above the director of their organization. I spoke last night with the director of public safety here, Director Struther, and he was, and I thanked him for the incredible preparation that his department had shown and enacted before the ambassador came, and it was fantastic. And there's no reason it couldn't have happened previously. But there's an administrative web, that bureaucratic web that prevents things from getting done here. That actually serves to stifle free speech in a legitimate way. Death by process, I call it.
Oh, that's interesting. So, Max, you mentioned earlier that Princeton is not Columbia, but it's a pretty low bar. So we'll zoom out and just look at this idea of where this leaves the reputation of Princeton. Where do you think these events and the general conundrum that Princeton is now in, where does it leave its reputation?
Well, look, there's a crisis of public trust in American institution of higher education, particularly so-called elite institutions like Princeton. And that trust continues to be breached time and again when you have faculty who overwhelmingly support one side on almost all political issues, when those who might disagree with that side are less inclined to speak up for fear of retribution, for fear of lack of promotion, for fear that even the way that graduate students are selected by often the professors, in order that the only way they are qualified to enter that discipline is such that they agree already with so many of the basic principles that those folks hold dear. And so it's really important that we acknowledge that this is a long-standing public trust issue that has kind of dripped and dripped and dripped over time. But when we have these sorts of events where the university has such an obvious potential issue, when there's a former prime minister of the most contentious country that exists on college campuses and in global public opinion right now, which is Israel, the university knows that that's going to be a problem. They know that there's going to be those who protest. They know that there will be those who seek to disrupt, those who do not respect the free speech of the attendees, of the Jewish students, of the pro-Israel students, the American students. And that is something that the university should be prepared for. And when they decide that the only place that they want to fight for so-called freedom of speech and so-called American values is in the public forum in the mainstream media, which is where President Eisgruber has taken his fight, which is why, he's spoken on the New York Times's The Daily podcast. He's written for The Atlantic. He's spoken to all sorts of mainstream outlets about protecting freedom of speech, protecting American values. And yet his university can't host the former prime minister of America's greatest ally. And yet his university can't support the free speech of its students, of its invited guests. That, to me, is an indictment of the reputation of Princeton and serves to legitimize the crisis in public trust faced by institutions of higher education today.
Thanks. Danielle, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't think I can add better than that. I think Max said it perfectly, actually.
Okay. So we're going to now turn to audience questions. Here's the first one in. For the April 7th event, were the students in the back masked from the beginning and for last night's event? Were any students masked? So it's a masking question, those two events.
Happy to take this one. So almost all of the students at the April 7th event were masked. Those who decided to protest, at least, not, of course, the attendees who were proud to show their support for free speech, to show their support for the former prime minister, or at least for his right to be there. And so that's a critical issue. They don't want to be identified. I mean, look, if I'm any cause for which I stand up, and any cause I know that for which Danielle stands up, we're willing to do it with our names, with our faces, and with our identities. And if there's a cause for which you're not willing to share your identity, to uncover your face, then either you don't believe strongly enough in that cause, or you know that there's something problematic about the cause for which you're fighting, whether that be opposing Israel's just war, but more importantly, perpetrating anti-Semitism and restricting the free speech rights of university students. So absolutely masked in that case. And last night, many of the protesters outside the event were masked. There were not protesters inside the event. There was strong security there were strong security protocols enacted in advance of the event and during the event, such that any disruption, one would hope, again, like Danielle said, it wasn't tested, would have been put out. But it is worth noting that the one person who very much within his right to ask a critical question, asked a very critical question to the ambassador. He was masked. And, it shows that there's almost an ideological divide among those who, those who feel that they need to be masked to show up to events that they had to, even the ones that they had to show, to give their identities to be at.
Yeah, I would just to go a little bit more in depth about that identity security difference between Mr. Bennett's event and the event we had last night. That was something that I actually insisted on in my meeting with Dean Fisher. Aside from saying that our event, we would not allow any sort of bags inside, we also said that every single individual coming to this event would need to show their student ID, which has their picture on it. And this is something I absolutely insisted on, and I won against university bureaucrats for, which I'm very proud of. I said any individual who is wearing a mask must, just as they would have to with TSA, lift the mask so we can actually identify them as they're entering the building. And that was something we insisted on, and we won. And I think it's important that other groups know that, because in the future, if they need to be in this situation, I hope not, but if they do, they should know that that is something that has now precedent in terms of university policy.
Oh, great. So we have another audience question. What has the Hillel Center for Jewish Life and/or Rabbi Gil Steinlauf, 91, done to address the situation on campus with regard to anti-Semitism? And in particular, has any Hillel administrator spoken out, as you have, against what happened on April 7th?
I can take this. And
Sure.
I think in terms of like, has any Hillel administrator spoken out? If any would, it would be Rabbi Gil Steinlauf. He's the executive director. I mean, no one to my knowledge has spoken out in terms of like the national Hillel organization. So really, the person of relevance here is Rabbi Gil Steinlauf, the executive director of Princeton Hillel. And he did email, I believe he emailed parents of students that night, describing the event. And he obviously put the emphasis on the very finale, where before the event concluded, when we were singing the Jewish praise songs, all of that for the Passover holiday, he definitely placed the emphasis there. So that's in terms of this event formally. In terms of the campus environment on anti-Semitism more broadly, I would say that ultimately Hillel is a Zionist organization, but I think, speaking as member of the Jewish community, and I think I could speak for Max as well here, I have grave concerns within the Jewish community about the crisis of Jewish education in terms of like educating our high schoolers, because I think that unfortunately a lot of Jewish students who really should have had a formal Jewish education, I'm saying Jewish students who participated in Jewish camps, Jewish youth groups, who come to campus and they have not been prepared for this environment, and they socially cripple themselves, and they find themselves supporting ideas and causes totally antithetical to anything that their parents raised them with. And that's something definitely I would say is a more internal Jewish community issue, because ultimately it's incumbent upon our community to better educate our own people. And unfortunately, I would say how this is regarded with concerns the Hillel is that I would say our Hillel could do a better job of being strongly Zionist, and being clear about that. But it is a Zionist organization for sure, but definitely it leans far to the left compared to many other Hillels.
Right, got it. So there's a third question. Was the Daily Princetonian account of the event last night, leader, accurate? Is there any follow-up needed, or was it as calm as the prince suggested?
I'll just note quickly, I think this is a pretty fast one. There was an individual arrested. I think that the prince covered that. But I don't know if the prince covered it in detail, if it did. There was an individual, an outside agitator, who was arrested in front of Nassau Hall before the event began. That was like a very violent interaction from the videos I've seen. Otherwise, classic to the Daily Princetonian's name, they undercounted our attendance. We know because we have the numbers on individuals who checked in. It was over 70 individuals who were in attendance there. They said it was 40. So that's just a classic issue pro-Israel groups have with the Daily Princetonian, that they like to minimize our event attendance. But beyond that, I would say it's a fairly good account.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Here's one. Go ahead.
I'll just add on briefly. I was at the protest where that person did get arrested and removed from campus. I have no idea whether charges were actually pressed. It's unclear exactly to me, having not been obviously in the protest, what the person was arrested for. But it was the response, as always, to any law enforcement action. This is these people who protest. It's important to note that these are not one issue folks. These are people who who oppose many of the institutions that they have that I would respect. For example, at many of their protests, they chant "P safe, KKK, IOF." They're all the same. That's the Princeton Department of Public Safety, who are there to keep them safe, and they're chanting this at the people who are standing there trying to keep them safe. KKK and the IOF, which is a derogatory term that they use to describe the Israeli Defense Forces. And so when they arrested or were trying to remove this student or this outside agitator probably from campus before the event, there was almost a human chain that they tried to form in order to seek to de-arrest, which is a term that they've presumably invented, to de-arrest whoever this was who had been arrested. They chant, "Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe," because they don't have any respect for the law enforcement personnel who actually put their lives and limbs on the line to keep all of us safe on campus.
Right. So that is a good lead into the next question. So why do you think, this questioner asks, that about 50 security folks were at the second event, and what prompted it? And I'll say that I just want to re-mention that Princetonians for Free Speech letter to Ice Gruber made specific demands to do with security, and we have reason to believe it might have had some influence. But why do you think that these security folks were at the second event?
Be happy to kick us off here. I think the university recognized the deeply humiliating and embarrassing spectacle that the Naftali Bennett event had presented to the university and to the broader American public. And this was an event that was covered widely across national media, on Fox News, where Danielle spoke in the Wall Street Journal, which actually quoted in an editorial from its board the letter that Danielle and I wrote. And so the university knew that it had to do something and that it couldn't allow that to happen again, particularly you would think they would have thought that the first time, since they're leading the charge against the government. But particularly in light of the fact that it had happened once and that they are engaged in this battle with the government. And so I think that the Department of Public Safety additionally realized that it had to devote ample resources in terms of preparation to setting up just lighting infrastructure. The last protest was very dark. They set up lights this time. They ensured that the barricades were very well established before the event. They had all sorts of personnel at various levels of the Department of Public Safety present to ensure both at the protest at Nassau Hall, then at the protest outside of McCosh, and then inside of McCosh Hall, that free speech would be protected and that we wouldn't have this same sort of spectacle. Then again, there wasn't that same impetus as occurred last time to step in because there weren't those same sorts of disruptions. The event was not, the speaker was not shouted down, and the fire alarm was not pulled. I presume, they were guarding the doors this time and the fire alarms. I think that was a pretty clear lapse in security. So I think that it was more a recognition of failure and than anything else.
I think Max put it very well, but if I could just add one point, it would be that ultimately, for an event with 70 people, 50 security guards are not actually necessary. And it's only necessary because the university needs 50 security guards as their form of deterrence. Obviously, we need a significant amount of security guards for such a high-profile speaker, given the campus climate. But ultimately, if Princeton had simply expelled a student for disrupting the event already, I think most of the students would actually have behaved very, very well, behaved better than they even had. And it's funny because it's amazing how much effort, how much resources Princeton is willing to put into um, making sure that they don't have to do the simple thing, which would just be punish individuals who violate university policies. We'll see what they do eventually. Obviously, there is an investigation, but in the past year and a half, if we have any experience from that, it's that Princeton is willing to jump through many, many hoops to avoid the simple solution, which is just to punish students who violate its rules.
Enforce the rules, yeah. So the next questioner says, thank you, Danielle and Max, for all that you're doing. And my understanding is that events with Israeli Jewish leader guests at Princeton University are not announcing locations in advance. What do you think about that? Either one of you.
I mean, this one I think is a fairly simple answer. It depends on the guest specifically, but at least with the ambassador last night, that is first and foremost coming from his security team. Just a matter of security. If the event flyer, which is being sent all over the place, has an address, there are obviously concerns well beyond the university. God forbid if a terrorist wanted to come and attack the ambassador, it would make that act much, much easier having that address publicized. So I mean, I think it's really just a basic level of security for that.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think that's just a security question.
Okay, I think we're at the last question. Are there any videos or recordings of the protesters during the disruption that the university can view?
Yeah, there are plenty of recordings. The positives and negatives of living in the era where everything is on camera. Is that everything is on camera? I mean, right now everything's on camera. So if you do it, I mean, even if you're wearing a mask, it's out there. And there was another student, not one of the two of us, who put a video online that went rather viral. And then when we put our letter online, it went rather viral on my Twitter account. And in that thread, there we posted a number of the videos to just show the kind of gravity of the disruption, the illegality of the disruption. And I hope that the university does its job and enforces its own time, place, and manner restrictions, enforces its own regulations, pursues an investigation into the felonious breach of the law with respect to the pulling of a fire alarm. And so it is essential that the university act, but they have the material with which to work.
Danielle, any further thoughts?
No, I think Max covered that.
So we'll wrap up with just a final quick question, which is, in light of everything you've said, and you've covered some of this, what do you think these events say to Princeton Jewish students? The events and the grantedly incomplete reaction from the administration. What do you think right now it says to Princeton Jewish students?
I mean, I think Princeton Jewish students, many of us at least, feel as though this is an insane moment because if what was happening to Jewish students was happening to essentially any other group of students on Princeton's campus, you can fill in the blank with whatever you might think, it would have never gotten to this place. I mean, you would have had suspensions, you would have had expulsions, you would have had the university hosting official programs and speakers to re-educate its student body, even if it can't prevent individuals from having, I don't know, racist, homophobic beliefs, you fill in the blank there. It would have had official university programming, educating against those beliefs. I mean, that is to say the university has both official and unofficial ways it can make a more comfortable environment for student groups. That anti-Zionism conference that happened, the university made no department has made efforts to make any sort of Zionism conference. I have classes all the time that spend 3-4 weeks on anti-Zionism without presenting the Zionist perspective on campus. So I think both in the very formal systems we have on campus, mind you, and that's not an issue of academic freedom. University professors are able to teach whatever they want, but they also have to, that's academic negligence, truthfully, because if they're not teaching the best counter argument to the argument they're presenting, they're not doing their job. So I think that is to say that there's both the formal levels here at Princeton University that are really failing Jewish students, because if we were any other group at Princeton, this would never have happened. But also just informally, I think socially it doesn't make me feel good that my peers are doing that and that my peers are so anti-Semitic sometimes. It is not the majority of students. At the end of the day, 200 people were protesting the Naftali Bennett event. There's 5,500 Princeton undergrads. So I do take solace in that most Princeton students were not there. So I think that's important to balance the two.
Okay,
And
terrific.
yeah, just to kind of add on to the original point that was being made, and this is not Princeton, but there's, I think, a kind of broader issue going on here. There was on the cover of the New York Post 2 days ago, they discussed how Cornell had, for its annual, we have lawn parties, they have slope day, for the big concert of the spring for all of its undergrads and all of its students. They were hosting somebody named Kelani, who's a singer who has espoused virulently anti-Semitic views, not just anti-Israel, but expressly anti-Semitic. Made the cover of the New York Post. And earlier this morning, after weeks of protest, the university president there made the decision to disinvite that singer. It's not an academic matter. Disinvite that singer from that performance. And on the Cornell anonymous forum online, I'm going to read 2 or 3 of the messages that were posted that were sent to me by my friends at Cornell. One was,
Max, we need to wrap up in just a second, so go ahead, finish
I'm
up.
just going to read one of them then.
Oh, go ahead.
Hearing we're going to get a rabbi to replace Kelani. Are these rumors true? Jewish parents, I hope Jewish parents don't get to ruin Slope Day. This is the type of thing that goes on at Ivy League universities that goes unchecked. And even when the university administrations step in, which is rare, the student body and the faculty have this anti-Semitism festering. Folks need to step in order that we can deal with this problem.
Thank you so much, Max and Danielle. So that about wraps it up. Just briefly, before you go, please consider making a donation to Princetonians for Free Speech to help us further support students like Danielle and Max. As a 501c3 nonprofit organization, we are funded exclusively by the generosity of individuals like you. And a link in the chat has appeared. More importantly, you can attend our virtual events, which we do host regularly by joining the PFS Inner Circle, which is a donor club with access to insider-only virtual and in-person events and more. So again, thank you for joining us today and supporting these remarkable Princeton students as they share their perspective. A reminder that this was recorded, and you will receive an email shortly with a link to the recording. And we invite and encourage your classmates to subscribe to PFS by visiting princetoniansforfreespeech.org. And if you have any questions or comments, please email us at updates@princetoniansforfreespeech.org. Thank you, Danielle and Max, very much. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Joining
And
us.
thank you, Leslie, for running this.